How is it that those who describe themselves as progressive and woke, meaning that they're open to the suffering and oppression of minorities and open to all forms of suffering and against racism and all these things, how is it that there are some people in those camps that are now espousing not just implicit but explicit anti-Semitism and Jew hatred and wanting to see the state of Israel annihilated? Ben Shapiro is interviewed on trigonometry, and he explains that actually woke ideology creates a perfect fertile ground for anti-Semitism. By the way, it's not just limited to that ideology. He also talks about how it comes about in other ideologies on the right and the left. But here he talks about wokeness spawning anti-Semitism. And I want to show you what he says because he provides some really insightful analysis. Have a watch.
General moral principle, which is suffering equals victimization at the hands of a higher power. And so that can manifest pretty quickly in anti-Semitism because Jews are disproportionately successful in a wide variety of endeavors. I think mainly because Jews historically have valued education very, very highly. And it's not unique to Jews. Thomas Sowell talks about middlemen Chinese in non-Chinese countries who study very, very hard and do really, really well. You see Asians treated this way at American universities, right? They're an other now because they become white. They become part of the system. And so they have to be discriminated against in admissions, for example. And so it can turn into the Jews are at the top of the system because the Jews benefit from the system. But what makes Jews particularly weird is that Jews are also, by the data, one of the more victimized subgroups, right? In terms of hate crimes, for example, attacks, physical attacks, or the state of Israel, which has been targeted by terror more than any other Western country by far, right? So it kind of violates all the rules. And I think there's a particular ire about that. So if it were just about Israel and the Palestinians, or if it were just about Arab suffering in general, as many people have pointed out, where were the protests when Assad was killing 500,000 Muslims in Syria? Where are the protests right now in Nigeria, where Christians are being killed, or Niger, or Libya, or a wide variety of other countries where people are suffering? The deportation of Afghans from Pakistan by the hundreds of thousands is happening literally right now. No one cares.
And so I think Ben actually summarized it pretty well at the start, where he says, if your worldview is that all suffering is a result of discrimination at the hands of higher powers, higher authorities, then that's going to be the paradigm through which you look at everything. And anyone who is in a lesser position of power will be seen as the moral hero or the victim, and they basically have all their moral agency removed, which is a very, very dangerous path to go down, because that means that basically criminality should be removed, because often people who steal from others may be in a lesser position of power than those who, let's say, may have more wealth. You could say the same thing about terrorism, that people that come from countries that are poorer, that have less political power, less agency in their lives, that they therefore can have all their moral agency removed. And the reason why they act this way has nothing to do with their own choices, their own values, but it's to do with some kind of oppression. And so, of course, Israel, though it's totally twisting the reality, because Israel has been, the Jewish people have been victimized throughout all of history, and returned to their homeland having been kicked out and decolonized it. But if you create a narrative that says actually the Arabs living there are the indigenous ones, that the Jews came there and kicked them all out, even though this is all ahistorical. But once you create that narrative and you say that anyone that is a victim in your books doesn't have can be excused of all their moral failures, then you create the perfect storm, the perfect place for justifying anything that's done against Israel. I think another reason why the woke ideology is so susceptible to anti-Semitism is because the Jewish people have always rejected this notion that even though you may be victimized, you're not going to wallow in your victimhood. You're not going to try and score points because of it, but you're actually going to try and rise above it and move on. And Israel is the most beautiful, wonderful example of that, the most incredible human rights project, the most incredible example of a people dusting themselves off after the worst genocide in human history, the genocide that coined the term genocide, the Holocaust, not to mention all the expulsions and oppression that occurred in the Arab world towards Jews. Nearly 1 million Jews were kicked out in 1948 and returned to their ancient homeland in Israel. But we don't do that. We don't talk about how we are the forever victims. The Jewish people don't think that's a healthy ideology, and they think it's really anti-life. Yes, we are victimized, and we have to honor those who suffered, and talk about that to maintain their legacy. But we say l'chaim, we say to life. And so it seems that Ben is really touching on the core issue of tension between a woke paradigm and a Jewish paradigm. And that's clearly why Israel causes so much provocation for those in that camp. And it seems from our interviews with people that have studied these kind of ideologies, the intersectional ideologies, and people that look into the progressive mindset, the far left progressive mindset, should I say, that you're never going to be able to win for as long as they have these kind of definitions and these kind of moral paradigms. And they're really not healthy moral paradigms, because it really creates a bigotry of low expectations in people. If you forever excuse people just because you said, well, you have less power than the person you attacked, then the world's never going to get better. Society's never going to improve. People aren't going to cooperate. People aren't going to try and improve their own situation, even if they are victimized. It's a very, very healthy, envious, hateful way of looking at the world. And it also feeds into the hate of the leaders of the Palestinian cause, because the assumption is, well, they're just acting this way because it's based on some kind of legitimate grievance, and therefore that needs to be addressed because there's all kinds of power imbalances. But if you actually listen to the people that created the concept of a Palestinian national movement, both in the past, the initial creators, and in the present today, they're very, very clear that for them, it's not really about a legitimate grievance. There'd be a legitimate grievance if there was a Jewish state and 1 square meter of land in that area. For them, it's based on a hateful, radical ideology, not about legitimate grievance. It's about an anti-Semitism. The roots of the Palestinian cause are Nazi-esque, not just in a descriptive sense, but in terms of their ideology, but also literally. There was a lot of crossover between the Nazi movement and the founders of the Palestinian cause. Literally, they collaborated. And so once you understand that you're actually just dealing with a hateful ideology, the whole paradigm shift is forced to change, because you can't appease hate. You can't appease an evil ideology that simply cannot make space for another. And that's the great irony as well. Isn't the whole progressive mindset about we have to make space for others? Whereas the Palestinian cause has been literally about, from start to finish, we cannot make space for the Jewish people. And that really is the root of so many issues that the Jewish people have faced throughout history, and that those who contend the Jews face. They need to be able to have an ideological maturing and find a way to make space to live with the Jewish people. I'm Ollie Annisfeld, and you're watching JTV. Thank you so much for watching. To watch another one, click here. To stay up to date with all our content, click here to subscribe. And if you're able to, you can help support JTV to grow and grow by clicking join below this video, where you can become a member and get perks including early access to videos and private live discussions with me. But most of all, you'll be partnering with us on our mission to change the world.